So let's dive in, to the extent you're willing to share, some of the things that you guys do for your firm in the market. And again, I talk about this a lot, and lots of things people can do, lots of things that work. Where have you been focused on last few years? What kind of stuff do you guys do?
I think you have to start with direct lead generation. I don't think you should start with SEO or social media or even billboards. I think that Google is still king, in my opinion. That might be changing with AI. I don't know. You got to start with direct lead generation. You got to start with what makes the phone ring. To me, that's always been Google. Now, you can't be silly. When you mass market, you're going to get bad leads. You've got to poke through the bad ones and you got to get to the good ones. That's the nature of running a practice. Then from there, I think once you start getting a steady flow of leads and you're, okay, I have figured it out, I'm paying my bills, we're making a little money, whatever. Then I think that's where you really start to talk about branding. You know, I think direct lead generation is different than branding. You're not building the brand by paying to be at the top of it, right? You're paying for calls there. Then I think it's branding. And after we invested in Google and did some other things, we decided we were going to do billboards. And so we've got about 50 billboards across different federal installations in the country. That's made a big difference. Sort of like, it's like a workout routine. You're not going to see with billboards, you're not going to see immediate gratification, but if you stick with it, you know. I remember being 6 months in and thinking to myself, did I really just cut a 6+ figure check for this crap? And then all of a sudden, it took off.
Welcome to the Founding Partner Podcast. Join your host, Jonathan Hawkins, as we explore the fascinating stories of successful law firm founders. We'll uncover their beginnings, triumph over challenges, and practice growth. Whether you aspire to launch your own firm, have an entrepreneurial spirit, or are just curious about the legal business, you're in the right place. Let's dive in.
Welcome to Founding Partner Podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan Hawkins. This is a podcast where I get to interview cool founders that are doing really cool things with their firms and hear about their journeys and hopefully get some advice from them and learn from maybe some of the mistakes they've made along the way. Not that today's guest has made many mistakes. We'll see what he says, but
I've made my fair share.
Yeah, so I want to welcome Robert Capovilla of Capovilla and Williams. He is I'll call him a military lawyer, and I'll let him explain what that is here in a minute. But Robert, thanks for coming on the show. Why don't you give a little bit of a high level about you and your firm, how many people you have, what sort of practice areas you do?
Yeah, I appreciate that. It's a pleasure to be here. I enjoy talking about the business side of law, and I enjoy talking about, sort of the maturation of our business. So thanks for having me. Yeah, so our law firm started off with me and my partner, my co-founder, Mickey Williams. We served in the United States Army JAG Corps together, got out together, had some other ventures that led us to Capovilla and Williams. And we've now grown to a law firm of about 40 total employees. We've got 18 lawyers on staff right now, and we primarily handle 4 different areas of law. So you're right, we do military law. So we represent service members in all sorts of matters all over the country and all over the world, really. That's how we got started, too. That's litigation heavy. And then we've got our veterans disability practice, and we've got our federal employment practice where we help federal employees across the country that are dealing with investigations or are the victims of things like harassment in the workplace. And then we've got our education law department. So we help college students and professors and faculty and staff that are under investigation under Title IX or some sort of applicable code of student conduct, or for a faculty and staff member, the faculty and staff code of conduct.
I did not know you did education law. There was a time where I sort of fell into that a little bit. I won't go into all that, but I did it for a very short period of time, maybe 10 or 11 years ago.
Yeah.
And very interesting, and then I got out real quick. But
I understand.
But what I found then, and I don't know if you personally do it, but the schools, they have these, I guess, process of justice, they'll call it, but there really was not due process, and nobody knew what they were doing. And so, you have these untrained college staff trying to make their way through this thing, and they were just stepping on landmines all over the place. I don't know if that's been your experience, but
yeah, it's a unique, I call it like a quasi-judicial experience, because it's on the university side, it's typically a bunch of folks that are not lawyers that try to behave like lawyers. And so every Title IX case or student code of conduct case that we have is entirely new on its own, so to speak, right? Now, we've been fortunate enough to do them at some consistent universities, so we kind of have a feel for how that works. But we do that nationally, so it's a wild world, and I think part of that is why we were attracted to it. Our first ever Title IX case came out of Emory University, and we had kind of grown up as litigators defending folks who were accused of major level felony crimes and sex crimes. And so when we took this case, I remember thinking to myself, this is going to be an easy win. Nobody's going to take this allegation seriously. And what I came to find out is no, sometimes in the Title IX world, common sense gets thrown to the side and we start discussing really kind of crazy things. And so we kind of decided after that, instead of pulling back from that and saying this is too different of a world, I kind of came to the conclusion that these primarily young men, right, they needed a voice, because what was happening, the Title IX process was not fair or right. And so that kind of became a motivation for us with that. So we kind of used our experiences as prosecutors and defense lawyers and litigators to help those college kids and a lot of professors too, deal with this really strange world that they call education law.
yeah, I agree with you there for sure. There's a huge need for these folks. I remember one of the ones I did, just real quick, we did a whole, call it trial, with the student body, or whoever it was. The students got to decide, they're judge and jury. They were judge and jury. And at the end, they said, yeah, there really was no evidence for the allegations, but we're still going to find against you anyway because we just feel like it. And I was like, this is crazy. But
yeah, it's a wild world, man. It's a very strange world, and that sort of thing happens, right? But we've kind of perfected it over the years, to the extent that it can be, and we have a group of lawyers here that do really good job with their Title IX and their education law cases, but it is still strange. I mean, some of the terminology as lawyers is strange, right? I mean, there's things that people get accused of that nobody with any degree of common sense would think that could violate any policy anywhere ever. And yet these primarily young men and students face expulsion and, their lives being derailed over stuff that is really quite crazy, in my humble opinion.
Yeah, totally agree with that. So back to your firm. So
yeah,
when did you start it? How many years ago?
Yeah. So Mickey and I had the bright idea to start this firm right smack dab in the middle of COVID. So I think our LLC that we started, I think, is dated around July 10th or so of 2020. So we're not a particularly old firm in that sense. Now, of course, we've been practicing law a lot longer than that, and between the JAG Corps and some other stops along the way. But Capovilla Williams officially started in July of 2020.
So that's... Yeah, so you've been around, let's call it 5.5 years-ish.
Mm-hmm.
That's 18 lawyers, man. That's tremendous growth. That's awesome. So congrats, number one. Number two, that's a lot of growth to manage and oversee. How'd you do it?
Well, I think it's more like present tense, right? Like, how am I doing it? Yeah. And I think the answer there is, I think in its most simple, basic manner, we created a mission statement and core values really our first few days in practice. And that mission statement and core values have been tweaked a little bit over the years, but not really. And they've sort of served as the benchmark, the bedrock, right, of what we've done and what we've built from. And so I think it starts with that. And then there's just a lot of, I feel like there's a lot of 2 steps forward, 1 step back, sometimes 2 steps forward and 5 steps back. And I think that you just have to be resilient. And I think you have to be courageous, and you have to get used to living a life that is uncomfortable. And so that's what I think when you ask the question about how we manage it. Solid mission, solid core values, organizational structure, building it from the top down, making sure we have the right people in the right seats, making sure we have operation procedures and SOPs for the business. And then of course, making sure that that we're aggressive on the marketing front and that we're doing things that are creative and that we're persistent about that.
So we will get into some of the marketing stuff later. I am curious also, I'll say this. One of the things we've had discussions before today that I find that I like about your approach is you invest, you have a thesis on maybe an area you want to grow, and then you invest to do it, and then it, hopefully it turns out. So I want to get into that a little bit later too. But
yeah,
before we get to all that, so when you started in the middle of COVID, crazy times, was it just the two of you?
That's right. Yeah, that's right. And we wrote the mission statement and the core values in Mickey's kitchen with his little 5 and 6 year old boys running around. And it's just the two of us. That's how we started.
Before you started, where were you? Were you at another firm? Were you straight out of the military? What?
Yeah. So Mick and I both started our legal careers as JAG officers, right? And people ask me, when did you commission? And I to be honest with you, it's kind of hard to remember now, but I think I commissioned somewhere around 2012. So I served about 10 years between active and reserve time. I got out of active duty, I think, in January of 18. Mickey and I joined up with another attorney who was doing primarily military law. After about a year, we decided that we wanted to change some things and tweak some things, and we weren't exactly bought and sold with the future outlook of that endeavor. So we joined a firm here in Atlanta that primarily does divorce work, but they also do a lot of military divorces. They had a military nexus and connection. And so we spent some time there, which was valuable in some ways. You learn what you want to be and what you don't want to be when you see how other people run, at that time, what I consider to be a fairly sizable practice. And then that led us to starting our own practice in 2000, and like I said, July of 2020. And it's been an adventure ever since. It's been certainly challenging and rewarding and all the things that come with entrepreneurship, I think.
Did you have clients and cases when you started, or did you start from scratch?
We started, when we left our prior firm and to start Capovilla Williams, we brought with us a small caseload, but it was pretty much from scratch. I mean, there was not a lot of assurances that any of this was going to work. And so we just started with a relatively small number of clients that kind of stayed with us, and we grew from there.
So we'll get into, and I said sort of the marketing piece, how you get clients. But before we get there, I was talking to an attorney yesterday, and their problem is not getting more clients. It's finding the lawyers to do the work.
Oh, sure.
And so I'm curious, growing a firm from 2 to 18 lawyers, that's no small feat, especially over 5 years. How do you find your lawyers? How do you go about recruiting folks?
My business coach and my marketer told me very early on that finding the right people in the niche work that I do would be my hardest challenge. And to start, he was right. We used to advertise. I remember the first couple hires we did were people that we had known somewhere along the way. Maybe we served with them in the JAG Corps. But then as we really started to grow, we had to kind of diversify that. And we used LinkedIn. That was sort of our primary method for hiring, especially during the early days. And I found that to be pretty effective. You got to spend some money on it. But if you do that, I found it to be an effective way to do it. And then I remember early on, Jonathan, we would put an ad up and we'd get a resume a week. We just hired 2 or 3 new lawyers around the new year. And in that batch, we were getting about 75 a week of resumes. So wow. I think once we started to establish ourselves within the niche practices that we have, that is, I think, one benefit of owning a firm that does, more niche work is you can find good quality people because they might not have a ton of options to do what they love elsewhere. So that part has turned out to be one of the most rewarding parts of my job, but also one of kind of the surprising. I've been surprised the last couple of years just about how the quality of applicants that we've received and the quality of people we've been able to bring on.
And I imagine too, the more established you are, the more relationships you have out there and people that know you and your firm, you're probably getting people sent to you on a regular basis which is always makes it a little bit easier too, I would imagine.
Yeah, it happens that way, especially like on the military side, right? Where, we'll come across a talented judge advocate that's either working as a prosecutor or defense attorney on a case we have. And, that can sometimes lead to conversations like, hey, I'm thinking about getting out in 6 months. And it's like, oh, okay, well, let's chat about that, right? So that part of it, as we've gotten bigger and our reputation has grown, that part of it has been a little easier.
And so your attorneys and your staff, are they all local coming in the office, or are they dispersed, hybrid, or a mix of both?
Yeah, so it's a mix of both. We're a national law firm, so we have attorneys in Colorado Springs, Florida, Texas, some up in the Northeast, and then we've got a group of attorneys and staff that work here at our 2 locations in Woodstock, Georgia, and north of Atlanta. So it's sort of a mix of both, which is nice. I'd like eventually to have everybody under one roof, but I don't think that would ever happen. But I would like to at least have my Georgia team all under one roof.
So I really don't know much about military law, and I'm curious. You can talk about a little bit about it as well, but does it make sense for you? And I'm just throwing this out of the dark because I really don't know, but
yeah,
to set up near in proximity to bases and military establishments, is that sort of a strategy potentially for you? I mean,
it is. It's a strategy that we haven't taken full advantage of. I decided relatively early on that I wanted to be in a region where there was a lot of military and veterans. And so Georgia kind of fit that mold for me. But I also, I didn't want to live like right outside of a base, because if you go to those bases, you'll see that they're not always the best places to live and to have a family and all that kind of stuff, right? So we picked Atlanta, the Atlanta area, for a couple reasons. One was there's a lot of travel for our litigators in the military side, so you've got the airport here. And 2, we were sort of strategically located kind of in the middle of a number of the largest installations. Now, we're going to be opening an office in Texas outside of Joint Base San Antonio in July. I'd like to get an office in Colorado Springs. So we're going to be doing more of the local model stuff. But for us to start, we were just hoping to make it, right, to make a living. And so we decided we wanted to pick a place where we wanted to live, and we would build around that.
Yeah, you mentioned Colorado Springs. My nephew's about to graduate from the Air Force Academy, so I was like, okay, you must be targeting those areas.
I've been there. I've been there.
I have not. He tells me it's gigantic.
Yeah,
the base,
it's
just huge.
It's a fascinating place. I had a jury trial there. I represented a cadet, and we won. And I remember that case because it was probably 1 or 2 in the morning when we got the verdict. And they deliberated for probably 7 hours or 8 hours. And for my line of work, that's a long time. And I remember thinking, that's not good, because I felt that it was sort of a all in or not. And I do remember going back out into the courtroom they have there. And I remember standing up next to my client, who I truly felt was an innocent man. And I remember this full bird colonel who was a pilot who just had, medals on medals on medals on medals, stood up and, one by one, each charge, not guilty, not guilty, not guilty. And that was a really cool day. My client was a first generation American from the Philippines who came to this country to go to the Air Force Academy. And it was the biggest thing his family could ever imagine him doing. So it really was a special day and a special case for me that I still remember. And it was one of the earliest trials that I had. And I also remember it because I only thought it was going to last a couple days. So I only brought 2 suits. And it ended up lasting. I learned a lesson that it ended up lasting like 7 or 8 days. And by the end of the trial, as embarrassing this is to say on a podcast, my suits had sweat stains on them. It was sort of embarrassing being in front of a bunch of highly decorated military officers. And I remember I made a little joke about it because you couldn't hide it. There was nothing I could do. I was dry cleaning that stuff. I bought a little steamer, So I remember that. That's my story about the Air Force Academy.
Yeah, nice. So you mentioned the trial. So the other thing, I imagine as your firm has grown, your role in the firm and your sort of responsibilities has probably evolved and changed.
Yeah.
So maybe, compared to the early days where you're trying the cases and doing all the stuff, what kind of stuff do you do nowadays in the firm? You still trying cases?
It's a lot different. It's a lot different. I still take trial work. Now I do it with a team. But to me, my competitive nature, my belief system, I still think that there's value, and not that I think, I'm certain that there's still value with me stepping into the arena of the courtroom for the folks who need it. But the majority of my time now is spent, running the practice. We recently named me CEO. We named my Mickey managing partner, and we do what executives do now most of my day. I mean, I love content. I love to write. I like to speak. I still enjoy sales and marketing a lot. So a lot of my time, I think that a lot of my time is spent on my people and then on our profitability, right? That's sort of my role now. And that leads to a lot of stress sometimes when you run a law firm that's grown like ours has. And some days are great, and some days like today when you're waiting for your first payment to come in, it's not so great.
Yeah. So I'm curious what your experience has been mentally, psychologically, whatever you want to call it, from, a lot of lawyers that identify as lawyers and as trial lawyers. When they move into this business role, they don't like it. They don't want to do that. What's been your experience? Has it been easy, or which do you prefer?
I love running my business. I love being an entrepreneur. I wake up every day, it feels like, and I have 100 ideas, and Mickey or our marketer or our team will literally tell me, like, stop with this and let's execute the plans we have. So for me, it's been a way to sort of an outlet for whatever creativity I have. I think that I do miss the courtroom. I'm not in the courtroom as much as I used to be, but the cases I do take now tend to be our higher, our whether it's higher publicity or something that I just fundamentally believe in. So I still get to do that, but it's been a transition. I've enjoyed it. I one time heard John Morgan on a podcast, and he was talking about how much he loves being a CEO compared to being a lawyer. And he talked about, he knew that he was going to be an entrepreneur when he was delivering papers as a kid. And most of us are not ever going to be as successful as John Morgan is, and we're not going to build what he's built. It's astonishing what he's done. But that made me think. I remember after that podcast thinking, well, were there any early signs for me for being an entrepreneur? And the answer is really no, except my buddy from high school brought this up when I was at a wedding last year. And they said, how big is your firm now? I said, I think we got about 35 or 40 people. I'm like, gosh, wow. And he said, Rob, I always knew that because whenever we would play sports games, whether video games, whether it was Madden or MLB, because we were big sports guys, he goes, you never would play the game. You would just build your teams and draft and do the banking and do the marketing and then simulate the seasons. And we always thought you were super crazy to do that because, you're the only guy we need to do that. So maybe that was any precursor to what I do now. So I enjoy the development and the organization and everything that sort of goes into that.
So I'm curious, your experience in the military, do you think some of the training there and some of the operational system, whatever they teach you there, do you think that translates well or not? I'm guessing it does, but I don't know.
It's funny. When you tell somebody you're in the Army, they automatically just think like, you fight in wars. The JAG Corps obviously didn't fight in any wars. We're advisors only. And so, I didn't go through Ranger School or anything like Mickey did or one of our partners, Dan, did. I'm not a combat veteran, so I can't speak to some of the harsher realities of military service. My military service was primarily done in offices and in courtrooms. And I got to do some incredible things. I got to go to air assault school and rappel out of helicopters, and I got to do some things that kept me physically fit, and I'm grateful for that. But I think the biggest thing for me was the discipline. Prior to the military, getting up at 4:30 or 5 in the morning would have been like going to Mars. It'd be like, what? Then in the military, you're just expected to do it, and you're expected to do it day in and day out. And if you don't do it, you're held accountable for that. Now, not everybody's getting up at 4:30 in the morning, but you get my point. Is you had to be at physical training even as a JAG by 6:30 a.m. in the right uniform, in formation, and as an officer, you sometimes lead people. So I think it taught me discipline. I think it's sort of, I don't know if I would say, like the old adage, like it made a man out of me. I'm not sure that I would go that far, but what I would say is certainly there was me before the military and me after. And who I was after was distinctly more disciplined than who I was before.
So you brought up a word, you said you were held accountable. Mm-hmm. I imagine as well that you had to hold other people accountable at certain points of your military career. And I've seen this a lot in firms that I've been in, and just the nature of a lot of lawyers. They could be bulldogs in the courtroom, but they are like pussycats in the office with the receptionist. They want to, they don't hold anybody accountable because they're scared. Mm-hmm. Do you think the military training has that helped you be able to hold others accountable in your firm?
Well, I think one of the greatest benefits that I got from my military experience was I got to work with some really incredible leaders. I got to work with some really bad leaders. And I've tried to take what I learned from the good ones and discard what I've learned from the not so good ones. And what I learned from the good ones, and this is something that I've held on to it, Jonathan, because I just think it's important, is the best leaders I had in the military were not micromanagers. They were folks that would call me in and say, Captain Capovilla or Major Capovilla, we have a new case that you're going to prosecute, and it's your case, and I'm your boss, and you answer to me, but it's your case. We'll meet every couple of weeks. I want to hear your progress, but I'm not going to be involved in every single aspect. We trust you. We think you're good. And that always caused me to do my best work. And those kind of bosses would let me make sure I had to do what I had to do personally to be prepared for high stakes, felony litigation where guys could go to jail for their lives. I despised the leader that would, every motion I filed, they wanted to see it. Every witness I interviewed, they wanted to hear a copy of the interview. And so I really didn't like that very much. And I didn't know anybody that liked that very much. Now, when you're brand new, you need that. So I'm talking more when I was experienced. And so I've sort of taken that model with me. And I tell my team all the time, 90% of my firm is veterans, and almost all of our lawyers are prior military officers. Probably 90% of our lawyers are prior military officers. I tell them all the time, I said, if I have to micromanage you, you're not going to make it here. You're prior military officers. Some of you have seen combat. Some of you have been deployed into places most of us are afraid to go. So if I've got to micromanage, then they just won't make it. So there's not a lot of accountability to be held with their work product because they're good. They're self-motivated. Where I have to hold people accountable is the sales side of the business, because that's the part where you don't get training coming out of the military to close business, or how important a lead is, right? And so that's the part where I do have to manage a little bit, and I do tend to be a little bit more overbearing when it comes to that side. But I've learned if you have the right people, you don't need to do a lot of holding accountable. And I think when you find, I've learned over the years too, when you see red flags, it's important to act early, and it's best sometimes to let those folks go early, because it almost never works out.
So you mentioned sales, so maybe that's a good segue into marketing. And I want to talk about ways you market your practice, but let's start with your podcast. So you have a podcast.
Yeah.
I think it's called Military Justice, right? Is that right?
Yeah, Military Justice Today, yeah.
Great name. Love the name.
Yeah.
So tell me about the podcast and sort of how you got started, how long you've been doing it.
Yeah. So podcast is 4 years old now. We've hit a bit of a hiatus the last 3 months. We sort of switched studios, and the holidays crept up on us, and we dealt with a government shutdown. And we're back in the studio next week, which I'm excited about. But I started the podcast early on. We had no money to start it. We had no money. But I wanted our service members, at that time, we were only doing military law, and I wanted our service members to hear Mickey and I talk and communicate. And I wanted them to, not all of them can afford a lawyer, and I wanted them to be able to click on a podcast and learn a thing or two about their situation and try to entertain them a little bit. And it sort of took off from there. I mean, I remember the first couple days, the first year, it'd be like we had 10 people listen and probably 6 of them were my mom. Then by the time I remember we did a podcast on the Trump assassination attempt because Dan Higgins is a junior partner here. He was a prior Army sniper. So he did like his whole breakdown, which was really cool. And that podcast got 27,000 hits. And then, some of our stuff on YouTube's gotten more than 1 million views, which is really wild to me.
So let me just pause for a minute. 27,000 hits on a podcast. That's amazing. That really, that is impressive. So,
yeah, I mean, that's awesome. That's what my marketer told me across all the different platforms. Not all of it's organic, right? We throw a little money into to marketing it. But yeah, I mean, it was cool.
I don't care. That's impressive, man.
It was cool.
Real quick, if you haven't gotten a copy yet, please check out my book, The Law Firm Life Cycle. It's written for law firm owners and those who plan to be owners. In the book, I discuss various issues that come up as a law firm progresses through the stages of its growth, from just before starting a firm to when it comes to an end. The Law Firm Life Cycle is available on Amazon. Now back to the show. So tell me about sort of the format of the podcast. Is it you and Mickey spitballing? Do you have interviews? Do you pick a topic and you dive deep? Is it educational? Tell me the format.
That's part of the reason we took a hiatus, because we weren't sure 3.5 years in exactly where we wanted to go with it, because we started off just Mick and I spitballing, let's just talk about an issue. That turned into, that kind of developed, and then we started to have we've had some best-selling authors on. We invited some very well-known people in military law to come on. And then from there, we decided that we wanted to get some of the other folks in the firm involved that come from a little bit different backgrounds than we do, whether they're Navy JAGs or Marine Corps or Air Force. And so we're going to be kind of recalibrating it now. When we come back on, we're going to have more contributors from the firm on it. We're going to also discuss a lot of veterans disability types of issues. And so it'll be not just military justice centric, but I'm hoping a bit more veteran relatable as well. So it just started off just me and Mick talking about, military law related issues. I mean, that was it. And it was kind of cool because now when we travel to a base or we go speak at a military event, people always bring up the podcast. And it's not that popular. The average episode was getting about 5,500 listens or something. But still, for guys that just started it and didn't really do much with it, it's a cool thing, and it's turned into a blessing for us.
So I got to ask, have you gotten clients out of it that you can loosely attribute or maybe directly attribute to?
Yes. What I think about podcasts from a marketing perspective is it makes it easier for the people who are trying to find you to find you. If a podcast is your only source of marketing, you're going to fail unless you're, Joe Rogan or, something like that, right? Sean Ryan or whoever those guys are these days, right? But it certainly has made it easier for people to find us.
And one benefit, for anybody out there thinking about it, it is a lot of work. A lot goes into it. You never really know. But it does create a lot of content that you can repackage, leverage, et cetera, in all sorts of different ways. I'm sure you do that. I mean, you mentioned the YouTube channel, but I'm sure you do other things with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, my marketer does a really nice job of getting those episodes out. We've spliced them up into little YouTube clips. We're on Apple and Spotify and all that kind of stuff, right? I have plans to do more of that as time goes on, because you're right. There's a lot you can do with a podcast episode. And I get, it's kind of odd, even though I'm not particularly old for what I do. Whenever I go to these lawyer conferences, I'm always one of the younger business owners in the room. But what's odd is people will come up now and ask me, how did you build your firm? And it makes me laugh, because it's like if they could see inside the walls, they would know that this is not perfect and it's not even close to perfect. But I always tell them, find a platform and get your voice out there. It can't be all you do. The lawyers that come up to me and are like, well, I have a great idea for TikTok. Well, that's great as a supplemental marketing approach, but you're not gonna, I know some lawyers have done really, really well with social media, but I've always kind of believed in a comprehensive approach to marketing. And so I do think a podcast, if you're in a firm and you're wanting to grow, it's a good way to do it. and it won't break. You can do it like we're doing it now in our offices. You don't have to break the bank to do a podcast.
Yeah, I do agree with you. It's one piece of a bigger series of things you do. I definitely agree with that. So you mentioned a second ago, your marketer. Is that somebody on staff, or is this sort of an outsourced person? Tell me about that.
It's sort of both. I like to say that he's our full-time marketer, but we've had discussions over the years, and there are certain clients that he has worked with for a long time that he continues to work with. And so we also have some in-house people that support him. So we've kind of massaged that over the years. But I think that, finding a good marketer early was one of the best things we ever did. And I remember our first office was an awful little space. And my business partner's wife had put this plant in there, and these bugs started flying around our office. This is the kind of way we started. And the first time I met my now marketer, he was in that office, and we were sitting there swatting bugs. And I'll never forget when he quoted me his fee. And I remember thinking like, oh my God, there's no way. But Mick and I just decided that if at that time things were looking tough, we had maybe 3 months of survival left before it was going to be closing doors time. And we kind of just decided, I guess, as Army buddies, that if we were going to go down, let's just freaking go down swinging. And lo and behold, within a relatively short period of time, the investment pulled off, the investment was worth it. And so it all kind of started after we got ourselves squared away on our mission and our values, and then the marketing. We've always been good lawyers. The world's filled with good lawyers, in my opinion. There's a lot of really good lawyers that are not making the kind of money they want to make because they haven't figured out the marketing side, or they don't want to figure it out, or they don't have the patience to let an investment work.
And 2 points there. You got to be willing to take a risk. Now, don't be too crazy, but you got to be willing to take a risk, and you got to take action. And you did both there. So you also mentioned he's a good marketer. So any advice out there for somebody that says, hey, I want to go find a good marketer?
Yeah.
Where do I find these people?
Man, I love talking about this stuff because I don't get to talk about it all that often, right? Most of the time, I get to go on podcasts. I probably do a couple a month. A lot of them are veteran related. I get to talk about disability. I was on a podcast a couple weeks ago. I got to talk about Georgia House Bill 108 and why I think that's terrible legislation and all this kind of stuff. But this is so much fun to me because it's like, it's all consuming, right? It's my life at this point. So I'm really grateful that we're talking about this. It is really, really, really hard to not be distracted when you're a lawyer by all the marketing stuff that's out there. It's really hard. You have people that tell you AI, you got to spend $100,000 a month on AI. You got to do this. You got to do TikTok. You got to do YouTube. You got to do all these things. And then you've got your people, your marketers out there that are just trying to make a living. I get it. But, we all get the videos, the advertisements. Hire us and we'll triple your revenue in a month and you'll get 1 million views on YouTube and all this kind of stuff. Or, in the olden days, we'll hire us as your SEO guy, and in a month you'll be the number one. In 1 month, John Morgan will be wishing he's you. And you got to get through, and I hope you don't mind my language here, but you got to get through all the bullshit there, and you got to find somebody who's a straight shooter. And if you do that, and they're knowledgeable, and they're going to care about your business, and they spend time with you, they take your phone call at 6:00 at night or whatever. That's the guy to go with, because you just can't be led astray unless you are made of money, which I was not. You have to figure out what the real big hitters are to generate leads. And that's the key, man. That's the key. Then you can grow from there, and then you can try stuff. You can have fun with stuff. I've done some marketing stuff that I've lost some money on, but it was sort of fun. But man, it's tough. It's tough to be a lawyer that's new to the industry, and you get all these people telling you, pay me and you'll make all this money.
Well, you hit the nail on the head there. So I don't know what it is, but it's like lawyers are walking around with this big sign that says, I'm a sucker. And you've got all these people, these snake oil salesmen, basically, promising you that. I mean, you exactly, like, give me your money, I can do this, that, and the other. And it's hard to sort of figure it out. It's almost like a full-time job to try to figure it out. And so, maybe you got lucky or maybe you had a system, but that's why I asked, for people that are out there trying to find, how can they begin to sort of figure out where to go? Do you have any advice on that?
Yeah. Man, that's a tough question. And I don't know if I have the perfectly right answer. What I would say is very seldom when you're shopping for a home do you walk into the home and buy it sight unseen. You don't do that very often. And I don't know anybody that does that, right? When you buy a home, what do you got to do, Jonathan? You go see a bunch of them. Your realtor takes you around. Then you got to have people come in to check it out and make sure all the pipes and everything are working and all this sort of stuff, right? I think it's like that when you purchase a marketer, because you can make mistakes in business. You can hire the wrong person every once in a while. You might lose a case that you thought you were going to win. There's not a lot of forgiveness if you hire the wrong marketer, especially when you're getting started. And so what I would suggest to people is interview the big guys out there. Interview the guys that you have a hard time finding on Google. Ask your friends that are lawyers how they did it. That's where probably I would start. If you have a successful friend or a colleague that's built it, ask him. And sometimes they'll lie to you, so be prepared for that too. And then find the one that makes you feel comfortable. And then the other thing I guess I would say is I do think that one thing I've looked at is how do they market their own business, right? That's a tricky street. Because you got a lot of big marketing companies out there that make a lot of money off lawyers. And I'm not big into that world. I like to find the guy that I can call at 8 o'clock at night. And so you got to that's a long answer to an easy question, man. But to me, you've got to explore the field. You've got to. Don't hire the first guy you talk to.
Well, I do like the house analogy. That is such a good one. You don't buy the first house you visit. You got to look at a bunch of them to know.
Right. And not to interrupt you, and I almost did. The other thing I would say is find a lawyer-specific marketer. Find a lawyer-specific marketer. Don't hire the guy who also has restaurants and, amusement parks and whatever. Hire sort of like you, right? Like if you want to have a lawyer draft a fee agreement or do a partnership agreement for lawyers, you're the guy to call because that's what you do. You know what I mean? I think it's the same for marketers. My life changed when I went and found a legal specific marketer.
So let's dive in to the extent you're willing to share some of the things that you guys do for your firm to market. And again, I talk about this a lot, and lots of things people can do, lots of things that work. Where have you been focused on last few years? What kind of stuff do you guys do?
I think you have to start with direct lead generation. I don't think you should start with SEO or social media or even billboards. I think that Google is still king, in my opinion. That might be changing with AI. I don't know. You got to start with direct lead generation. You got to start with what makes the phone ring. And to me, that's always been Google. Now, you can't be silly. When you mass market, you're going to get bad leads. You've got to poke through the bad ones and you got to get to the good ones. That's the nature of running a practice. Then from there, I think once you start getting a steady flow of leads and you're, okay, I have figured it out, I'm paying my bills, we're making a little money, whatever. Then I think that's where you really start to talk about branding. I think direct lead generation is different than branding. You're not building a brand by paying to be at the top of Google, right? You're paying for calls there. Then I think it's branding. And after we invested in Google and did some other things, we decided we were going to do billboards. And so we've got about 50 billboards across different federal installations in the country. That's made a big difference. Sort of like, it's like a workout routine. You're not going to see with billboards, you're not going to see immediate gratification. But if you stick with it, I remember being 6 months in and thinking to myself, did I really just cut a 6+ figure check for this crap? And then all of a sudden it took off. And then I think, figure out other ways to build your brand. A podcast, I think, is a great way to do it. If you're a writer and you want to, I know a lot of people kind of poo-poo the idea of blogs today. It's like old school now, right? I still write. I love to write. I think writing makes a difference. So you've got to be comprehensive in your lead strategies. And then there's all your marketing strategies. Then there's a whole bunch of other stuff. You've got your super lawyer stuff. You got your Martindale, Hubble or whatever they are stuff. You've got your Justia stuff, your Avo stuff. I mean, that's all to me supplementary. That's all to me stuff you do when you have the money to do it. If you're a new lawyer, new firm, whatever, not even a new lawyer, if you're new in a firm, focus on direct lead generation. Don't focus on social media. Don't focus on all this other stuff. Focus on direct lead generation, in my opinion.
And so you touched on it a little bit, but one of my questions was going to be, because you have this national practice, national firm, you can't spend money everywhere all at once. You bleed you dry. John Morgan's the only one that can do that, right?
Yeah.
So I was going to, so you got the billboards, that's interesting, and you put them in the right places. I mean, that's the other thing. You don't want to put billboards just anywhere. Just like for my practice, billboards would be the dumbest thing in the world for me to spend money on. Mm-hmm. But if I put an ad, which I'm about to do, in a legal journal that only lawyers read, that's like my form of a billboard, right? So I'm going to experiment. We're trying it. We'll see what happens. So other than the billboards, how are you sort of really, and I guess branding the podcast, what other ways do you get your name out? Because you can't, the other thing about Google and SEO, you can't do that all over the country all at once. Mm-hmm. So how do you work through some of the thought process of where to focus at any given time?
You got to have you've got to master the direct lead generation part first, in my opinion. Whether that's you want to go network and get referrals, which I think I've never done a very good job of that. I'm a bit of an introvert, despite the fact that I like to speak. I prefer to be keynote speakers than the guy shaking hands, if that makes sense. So I've never been great at that. My old managing partner at my old firm, he was really good at that. And they brought in good leads that way. I still think referrals are probably the best leads you get. But if you're not somebody that loves that, or if you've got cases and you just can't get out there, right? Like, that's part of the problem. To me, I invested in direct lead generation. Then I invested in branding, the billboards, the podcast, the written content. And then once we kind of got that underway, I ventured out into, your lawyer specific fields, like, your super lawyers, your Georgia elites, that kind of stuff. And then I kind of hit the road, and I would go to the different like VFWs and American Legions and go talk and meet with folks. And then video, video has been a central piece of what we've done. It's expensive. Nobody likes it. Nobody likes cutting a big check for videos. But to me, having a really high quality video that you market well, I think that's helped too. And then, you have your other things. Like, we wrote a book. I got a royalty check, Jonathan, for $396, which means 80-something people bought my book. And that's a small number, but it was kind of cool. So you got to put yourself out there, and you've got to try and see what works in your line of work. You're correct. In your line of work, a billboard would be silly. But targeting the people that could be your clients, which is what we've done with our billboards. We broke deals with bases, military installations. They go to the gym, they get to see my face. I was at a base recently, and this very jacked, built Army Ranger came up to me. He's like, "Mr. Capovilla, I look into your eyes every Monday and Wednesday when I do my squats." So now, does that mean I'm a good lawyer? No, it doesn't. But does that mean if that particular Army Ranger runs into some problems, or he has a buddy run into some problems, who do you think the first person in their brain is going to be? Right?
It worked.
It works. I mean, and you know what's funny about billboards is lawyers look down at other lawyers for billboards, right? But the public doesn't do that. Unless you're a silly lawyer and you've got silly billboards, like some of these I see with I don't know, these people that make fools of themselves. But, people with the general public, when you have billboards, they think you're a big deal. They don't know.
It's funny you say that. I was in Athens 6 months ago with we were at dinner, a lot of us at dinner, and one of the people at dinner was sort of a local PI, and he has some billboards, and they're sort of funny and they're interesting, whatever. But all the wait staff were coming up. "Are you so and so? Can we get a picture?" It was hilarious.
Yeah. There's a local guy here whose operation is 1/5 the size of mine, but he's got billboards all over town. Good lawyer, good dude, great guy. And he's like a local celebrity. Kind of cool, but I guarantee you he gets business from that. I guarantee you people remember him. So us lawyers might see a slogan and go, I would never do that. But the general public remembers it. So I always think when it comes to marketing, look, I know John Morgan is a character in the legal world that you either admire him or you hate his guts. But I always said from a marketing perspective, look at what that guy is doing. And if you can afford to do some of it, do it, because he's not a dumb guy. And so I've kind of looked at those mega PI firms and I've thought to myself, okay, well, how can I incorporate that into my business? And that has worked well for me. That's worked well for me. And people make fun of our billboards sometimes, and our competitors don't like them. But, to me, I don't care. It gets our name out there to the people who need us.
I hear you. So you mentioned the book. Tell me about the book. What's it called? What's it about? How do you use it? Yeah,
it's a book. I wrote this book over winter break 3 years ago in 2 weeks. We weren't very busy at the time. It was winter. Everything kind of shuts down in the federal government. I wrote this book called Defense Strategies and How to Win Court-Martials. And I put everything I had into, it's really a litigation book. It's a trial strategy book, how to build a case from scratch. And we're going to update it next year, not this year, but next year we're going to update it. It's for sale on Barnes & Noble and Amazon and all that stuff. And, we're proud of it. It was sort of meant to be a pocket guide. It's only about 150 pages. It's meant to be a pocket guide for the folks out there that might want to hire a lawyer but couldn't necessarily afford it. And my thought process was at least they can have something to serve as a benchmark for them, So yeah, it's a trial strategy book.
So do you hand that to leads, or when you speak, how do you distribute it? Or is it just if they buy it, they buy it?
When I travel to the bases, we give it to the JAG officers that are in at the base, because they put it in their bookshelf, and the client that comes in to see the free legal help that the military officer sees our book. That's the first thing I do. The second thing I do is it's on the website. And then the third thing I do is I include a link in our reach out emails. When we're done with talking to a lead, we send an email that breaks down the agreement, has some information about the firm. I include the book link in that email for no other reason than it gives us some authority. The other thing that I would say too about marketing is this: one of your best marketing approaches is your success. And so you got to have a good team, and you got to have good lawyers, and that'll lead to good reviews. I always find it shocking to me how many lawyers don't care about their Google profile. It's wild to me. I look at these good lawyers, like guys that you would say that's a smart lawyer, and they've got a 4.2 with 18 reviews. To me, that shows a lack of attention to detail. And if I'm a lead, if I'm going to hire a lawyer, I want somebody that cares a lot about detail. So it's kind of those little things, Jonathan, that us lawyers, we tend to put our nose in the air. I'm a lawyer. I have a really fancy degree, and I'm really smart. I know transactions better than anybody in America. Nobody cares if you don't market. Nobody cares. Nobody cares. And you're not helping people.
That is a mindset shift that a lot of lawyers need to hear. It's marketing allows you to go help the people that need you. So you need to do it. So
that's right. That's a motivating factor for us.
So we're getting close on time here. I do have two more questions I want to ask.
Yeah, it's great, man. I'm happy to do it. Yeah.
Again, we've got lots of things we're not going to be able to cover. But so for somebody out there that's starting a firm, starting to grow a firm, they look at they see you started, just two of you, and now you got 18 lawyers. Any pieces of advice you might give them for the folks that are trying to get where you are?
I don't know. I think we're halfway done with our journey here. I think in the next 5 to 7 years, I would be surprised if we don't hit 100 total employees and 30 to 40 total lawyers. So I always feel kind of self-conscious answering that, because I don't really view myself as all that successful. I just don't. I know some people would look at a firm of 18, 19, 20 lawyers, which is where we've kind of been, and they think that's big. And I think if you would have asked me 5 years ago, my jaw would have dropped out of my face if you would have said you're going to have 20 lawyers by 2026. But if you're asking me to provide some advice, what I think has to be at the top of the list is a commitment to the vision. And I'm not talking about a mild-mannered commitment. I'm not talking about going to the gym for a month and being like, it's not for me. Man, when you grow as fast as we have and you go from 30 grand a month of overhead to 100 to $500,000 a month or whatever it might be, if you're not committed to the vision, you're not going to make it. It is a hard thing to do. I don't sleep at times. I am uncomfortable a lot, but I've always believed, this is maybe the military or the historian in me, if you want to take the island, you got to burn the boats. Nobody likes being uncomfortable, Jonathan, least of all me. Do you think I enjoyed increasing the overhead another 40, 50, 60, 70 grand or whatever it is? No, not really. I didn't. But I also know what the vision is, and we remain committed to that. So a commitment to the vision, I think, is first and foremost. And I think you got to be on. You got to be true to yourself too. If you're the kind of guy you want a nice small practice, there's nothing wrong with that. Be true to yourself, man. Know yourself. Me, I've always wanted something big. You know, I've always wanted something big. I think the second thing is you got to have guts. And I tell myself, you know, if you don't program your mind will program itself. And that's not always good for people. Every morning I wake up, I have the same routine that I stick to, brother, except for Saturdays and sometimes Sundays. But 4:30 in the morning, I am reading my vision statement every morning just to be tough, just to remind myself about why am I having sleepless nights? You know, why am I on the phone 9 hours a day? So I think number one, you got to have a vision. Number two, you've got to commit to the vision. And to me, that's always been reading it, reminding myself about it, you know, meditating on it. And then the third thing is, man, you got to accept failure. I mean, you got to accept failure. I don't care if you're John Morgan or if you're President Donald Trump or if you're an athlete, doesn't make a difference to me. You've got to be willing to accept failure. I honestly think we fail as much as we succeed here, but we put ourselves in the arena. That's all you can do. The chips will fall where they may after that. My father, when he was alive, God bless his soul, always used to say, you worry too much, Rob. Do your best, put the chips on the table, and they will fall where they will. And I've tried to do that in my business life. And if you're going to have a business partner, which I do, and there's ups and downs, that's almost like a second marriage. There's been times where both of us have wanted to be at each other's throats. But I guess the last thing I would say, I know this is a long answer. I apologize. I know we're like an hour into this thing already, and I'm very long-winded. You have to have a business partner like who you guys aren't going to have 100% the same vision. It's just not reality. But one thing Mickey and I have done exceptionally well, I live in the same home that I bought when I was making $65,000 a year. I drive the same pickup truck I bought when I was a captain in the Army. I read in a book somewhere, you cannot be distracted by the shiny things. We make the kind of money now, Jonathan, where if we wanted to, we could do it. And there's going to come a day where our families deserve it. But to build a law firm, you know, and you want to take out 6-figure distributions for yourself, unless you're a big-time PI lawyer and you hit some big windfall, PI is a little different. Most of us guys that are litigators that are doing niche stuff that live off of retainer fees. And you got to make your mind up what you want to be. Do you want to drive the Porsche or do you want to have a firm of 100 people someday? Because you can't do both always.
So great answer. And you didn't know this, but it's actually the perfect segue to what I was going to ask you last. And that is,
cool.
To the extent you're willing to share it, what is your vision for the firm and for your life? Maybe it's the same thing. Maybe it's different. So what's the vision?
So I want to, our next phase of development is going to be on the VA disability side. And I want to build an empire from coast to coast and help veterans with their disability claims. I am sick and tired of the claim sharks. I'm sick and tired of getting calls from veterans about they had to pay $15,000 up front or some nonsense to have some weirdo file their claim for them. I want to build a big, well-run disability practice for our veterans where they only pay if we win. And I want to be the most branded firm in the country in that. So if a VA disability attorney hears this, I suppose they should put themselves on notice to some extent, but that's what we want, and we want to continue to cultivate our litigation practice. We want to be, I don't know if I want to grow that much more because I think great litigators are hard to find. So you got to be careful there, but to me, I want to be the most well-branded disability firm in the country.
I love it. We're going to end it with that. Robert Capovilla, thanks for coming on. For people out there that want to find you, what's the best way?
Yeah, so obviously you can look up the name. You can look up the name Capovilla Williams. You can look up our podcast, Military Justice Today. You can look us up, Capovilla Williams, on YouTube. And if I could, too, Jonathan, just give you a shout out, man. Like if you're a lawyer that's listening to this and you're interested in growing your firm, Jonathan can help you do that. I know personally that he can help you do that. And so part of growth is having your own lawyers, okay? That's part of growth. That's part of it, guys. Don't be writing your own contracts, folks, because unless you're a contract lawyer, and even then, you might not want to do it. So you can find me all kinds of places, but I at least wanted to say that because you've got a cool niche, man, and I think you're in a cool area of law yourself.
Well, I appreciate that, and you didn't have to do that, but I do appreciate that. It's been fun to get to know you and seeing what you're building over there, and I can't wait to see 5 years from now. Another 5 years, so that'll be your 10-year anniversary. Maybe you're double the size or more, so it'll be fun to watch.
We'll see. I'm just trying to get through today right now, to be honest with you.
Yeah, you may not be getting much sleep.
Yeah, but, not so much these days, but that's okay. That's okay. It's all part of it.
That's right. Well, cool. Well, again, thanks for coming on, man.
Of course, brother. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Founding Partner Podcast. Be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts to stay up to date on the latest episodes. You can also connect with Jonathan on LinkedIn and check out the show notes with links to resources mentioned throughout our discussion by visiting www.lawfirmgc.com. We'll see you next time for more origin stories and insights from successful law firm founders.